All right. We are live. It is Wednesday, November 9th, and today is the day after the midterm elections. Lots to talk about. Looking forward to listening to what is the impact on the economy, the flywheel of North America, innovation, creation, digitalization. We have a great guest, which is our own Linda Gasparello, who is our own expert on the political matters. And we will try to do justice on the technology side of what does this all mean. But before we get rolling, let's ask our own John Sibley Butler for some music.
I'm not trying to forget you anymore. I've got back into remembering all the love we shared before. The best thing in my life is still when you walk through my door. And I'm not trying to forget you anymore.
Very nice, very nice. Johnny, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. I went and voted yesterday, big election day, and looking at all of the.
Come closer to the speaker for some reason.
Yep. Is this better now?
No,
It was okay just then. Can you hear me?
hardly.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, let me do this. Why don't you go ahead and start and let me get my speaker stuff together. Okay.
Llewellyn, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. I have a slight cold, but nothing serious. And I am contemplating what happened last night. And I have come to the profound conclusion that democracy may yet be saved, that the American population is smarter than I gave it credit for, and that common sense has prevailed. And also, interestingly, that this was an election which upset the pundits, upset the observers, upset the political class, but didn't have the country nearly as involved. And the evidence for that is how low the turnout was. About 1/3 of the qualified electorate showed up to vote, which suggests that what seemed to be such a stressed election didn't affect most of the public that way. Whether you were a devout liberal or a devout conservative, mostly it wasn't shown at the ballot box. The ballot box showed a country that is divided, but not as bitterly divided as we thought. And the extremists by and large, didn't win. By and large, the public said no to extremism. So there are very interesting things here, and there's going to be profound effects. On Monday, the 15th, Donald Trump has promised that he is going to make a big announcement, a huge announcement. And of course, everybody has assumed that that meant that he will announce that he is running for president. This election may give him pause. It may cause him to wonder whether he really wants the humiliation of possibly losing or of facing an insurgency from Ron DeSantis, the governor of California. So the world has changed, but not changed in ways we thought it would. Not a great red wave or a great blue withdrawal. It's changed, though, in terms of how it sets the tone for the future and what players might come into the arena going forward.
So Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida.
Florida, what did I say?
Cali.
Did I? No.
Yeah, that's okay. That's
All
okay.
right, well, I'm a journalist.
It's a Floridian slip.
Florida.
No pun intended on that Floridian slip.
All right.
John Butler, how are you, sir?
Fine. Am I coming through cloud and
Better.
Well, what I think is, I absolutely think what Llewellyn said is correct. I think that we'd expected a lot of extremism. It just shows you that how people think about the world and how they vote and what they say on the news media might be very, very different. It's obvious to me that if you look at what's going on, that the House will probably be Republican, and the Senate will probably go with the with the Democrats. And I think the most important thing, you have a runoff, lots of runoffs. We have runoffs here in Texas. I think we have a runoff in Georgia between Warnock and Walker. I think that the senator's race, well, most senators' race will go to a runoff. And the question is, how do people think about their future in terms of the attitudes and the things that must be done in the country? Of course, everything with me is about innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think when taxes go up, they hate it. I mean, they hurt the enterprises, but they help the person who can put money in the bank and get their interest rates up. So I think it's pretty wild. I think it's pretty interesting. And I think that we won't know until it's over. As we say, it's not over until it's over.
Yep, I agree. So Linda Gasparello, you've been here before. You are the better half of our own King, head of King Publishing. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, very well. And I really do agree with a lot of what Llewellyn and Johnny had to say, especially because we had expected that there would be great inroads by the Republicans, the great red wave we had looked for, and instead it was more like a ripple. And I think what it really shows is that people really are always sort of vote the middle. That's the way the Americans are. Mm-hmm. I think Republicans did, to a great extent, except for extremist Republicans, had a very good message of the economy. It was something that Bill Clinton always said, it's the economy, it's the economy, it's the economy, trying to appeal to these middle of the road Americans who are looking at their pocketbooks, who are looking at the future, who are looking at their savings. And it's important to them. It's extremely important to them. I think they were very scared by violent language. And I noticed that the Federalist Society, which is the conservative group that advises lawyers and courts, is having a meeting in Washington on the election outcome. And one of the things that they're looking at is violence and how do we stop the violence. I think Americans were really worried about intimidation. They've seen violence in their streets, but they don't want this to be inflamed by people who are very extreme. And therefore they looked at people who they thought, would not offer that opportunity once they got in. Yeah. So it was an interesting election. I think that legislatively, it was an interesting election. You really did see states where you thought that there would be a turn in the legislatures and they would go almost irrevocably to the Republican side, like Wisconsin, and install a supermajority. Instead, they didn't. The Democrats prevailed there. They prevailed in Michigan. This shows a balance. People want a balance. There's so much violence in the world. There's so much misinformation in the world. There's so many things that people have to worry about, and they want a balance in their life. And
I think I agree with all of you, but the biggest thing that I see, and I don't think is concrete yet, and I'm going to go to the map here to show what's going on, and you all that have joined us can see what's going on. Is that, we're a tad closer to the Republicans winning the House. And that happened to just about every other president at the midterms. Americans love a divided government. They love a divided government because the government then doesn't do stupid things. So I think when my own humble final analysis is that's what the country wanted, a divided government. So we stopped the stupidity on either side, right? And that happened to Obama, that happened to Bush, that happened to Clinton, that happened to Trump. And so, it's just classic. It's just classic Americans, but there are some interesting things that, clearly whatever law and innovation and funding is going on is going to get dispersed. I don't know. I mean, does Johnny, is there a possibility that the current Congress, if it goes Republican, which is most likely going to happen, which is a big victory for them, is that going to have an impact on the infrastructure bill and the in the inflation bill? Is there a way that they could reverse any of that or no?
Well, I think it's got to pass both the House and the Senate. But basically, think of it like this. If you look at, the theory of the Republican Party is that everybody in America is responsible for themselves and their children and what they do, and the government can help out. The philosophy of the Democratic Party might be people are responsible to themselves, but we help out more. And I think that historically, when you look at that relationship and forget about, that the Republican Party has been more gracious toward the whole idea of building the country. But on the other hand, I don't think there's much difference between the parties when it comes down to if there's a Republican from Texas and bridges need to be done, it'll be done. If there's a Democrat from Arkansas, it'll be done. So we have to distinguish the aggregate of the vote, I think, from what really happens to be done. Now, what happens then, I think that the infrastructure bill, I think it will go through. I think if you I'm looking at some analysis of the election. The Republican Party won a majority of white women, which was an important voting bloc, and they also won lots of Spanish whites, which I'll call Latino men and Latino women.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this represents a lot of the abortion stuff and the big issues in the economy. But for the most part, I think that it would have. If the Republicans control the House, for example, they will also control most of the spending things that will be done by America, and businesses, of course, and lack of taxes will always generate.
Right. Johnny, real quick follow-up for you. Do you see the victory of DeSantis and the leftover funding that he raised? Apparently, he raised a ton of money, and he has $100 million plus in the bank that he can use for a run to the White House in a couple of years. Do you see that he's overwhelming victory, sort of like 1.5 million votes over the opposition, as a mandate for him and potentially as a shift on who is going to be in charge coming up?
Yeah, well, I think he won in Florida because of the issues of what's happening in Florida, whether it was the quote wokeness of destroying American history, and Florida has a lot of history. And I also think he won because of the general shift in how people are thinking about the world. I do not think that this makes him automatically a candidate for president of the United States. I think the guy from Virginia, to me, he would be more of my candidate for the president of the United States. And I think that you got to get past, quote, the extremism. Now, a lot of it came from the abortion issue, right? And a lot of it came from what would come from issues that's being, tailed back. So they would say, okay, you are a single family home. Whose fault is that? That's not the government's fault. That's your fault. You need to make better decisions.
Right.
And I don't think you would see that in the Democratic Party. They might say that, I have X amount of student loans. And you say, well, your parents are responsible for sending you to college and not the federal government. I think it's these kind of issues that will be paramount when we start. But I do not see especially, it happened in Florida. If you look at a lot of the people who endorsed by past President Trump, they did not win. And I think if you look at the party in general, the question is, how do you get great policies that benefit America without a president that's in chaos? And
right.
I think the guy from Virginia would be a good, if we get him to run, play basketball at Rice University, about 6'7", sold his company for about 500 million about 8 years ago. I think he would be a great, a great candidate. But obviously, when you have that much in terms of winning, and I think he was a possibility before the election to represent the Republican Party in the next presidential election.
Yeah. Llewellyn, what say you on
Well,
all
a couple of points. The first one is, Johnny is quite right. All money bills originate in the House, but the two big bills, the two big money bills, have already been authorized, appropriated, acted on, and signed into law. So there isn't anything dangling out there that will much affect future spending. The big money is now being spent, the infrastructure bill and the so-called IRA, the Inflation
Act?
In the Inflation Reduction Act. So that is going on. That's happened. The thing that you should look to this election and see is that it didn't say what the people want. It did not answer what we're going to do about inflation. It did not say what our degree of participation in the conflagration in Europe should be. In fact, it didn't advance either party's point of view very much. It did not turn out to be a great decider on abortion, nor did it do anything for some of the dearly held Republican positions. It was a remarkably status quo election. Leave it alone, leave it as it is, which suggests an electorate that isn't sure, that hasn't made up its mind, and hasn't been wholly convinced by any argument on either side. Now it is up to the administration and possibly to the Congress to start solving some of the problems. Crime is a problem. Undecided issue of abortion is a problem. And of course, the degree of our involvement in Ukraine is going to become a problem because there are people who are opposed to it. The winter is coming on. Things are going to get very bad in Europe. And none of this was addressed in this election. This was an election about who do you like? And the answer was, well, we sort of like both of you, but not all that much. We didn't bother to come out and vote. Going forward, what is going to change things is what we're going to do, who's going to run for president, and we may have an idea of that very soon. But also, as I've said often on this program, and which I think one can honestly say is the underpinning of this program, is the concept that technology often changes things much, much more than politics, and that politics sometimes, quite often actually, is trying to catch up with technology. And technology is zooming ahead, but I wrote what I thought was an interesting article this week. It's published in Forbes, which is basically, has the internet got too complex to be managed, and will it implode under its own complexity? What is called emergent behavior. When some little thing that nobody knows, old code, old hardware, old sensors, something unknown, triggers the equivalent in the cyber world of spontaneous combustion. I think this is a very interesting subject because we are fast moving. If we're 80% dependent on the internet today, we're fast moving to 100% dependence when we electrify everything. And we're moving towards total electrification as fast as we possibly can. So there are doubts there. These are things that are not easily addressed by politicians. They're complex, they're technical, and there is no one mind in the technological community about how to handle these issues. We are going to see a lot happen technologically just between now and the next election, and that may be a deciding factor.
And your point about the fact that there are no minds that can handle this topic has to do with everybody outside the CMG working group, right?
You know,
No, but
I suppose I won't.
let me stop.
I suppose I won't get my normal fat performance fee check.
No, that's all right. That's right. I want to hear from Linda. Linda, what say you on all this?
Well, I think that Llewellyn's right about the House. There are a lot of things that are already put into motion, but with the incoming, with the freshmen who are coming in, there are some things that were on their minds that I think that they would like to have a voice in. Number one is entitlements. Everybody wants to have a say about what will happen with entitlements, and Republicans are especially vocal about that. Alan Fung, who ran here in Rhode Island and was defeated, Republican, ran last minute ad saying that Social Security would not be threatened under him. But you know, once you get to Congress and you're in the throes of joining committees and being whipped by the whip, you often don't have the kind of voice that you would like that you had when you were a candidate. Entitlements are up for grabs, as is funding for Ukraine, which has very recently scored successes that would, that are hopeful. I mean, again, Ukraine is up against Russia, but it has done extremely well with support from the United States. That will be up for grabs. And there are other things. There are things, as Llewellyn said, that we did not hear from the population about. We didn't hear from the candidates about. And we should have, because those are our future issues. Our future issues are things like grid security. Are we going to be safe? Are we going to have rolling blackouts from an attack? We ought to know about these things, and they just didn't come up. It seemed to be an election that was fought on whether you were an anti-abortion person or whether you were a pro economy person. So I think there's just that big gap that needed to be filled and was not filled, and we'll see. We'll have to see what happens when they get there.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in one thing now, Linda, if I might, and that is this Congress and the current administration may have to make a decision about Taiwan, and there might be a decision of whether we fight or acquiesce. And it's going to be a huge decision when it comes, and we're going to have to make it at some point.
Sure. When we get out of the aggregate, I'm looking now at the condition of the nation's economy, and these are exit polls results based on 18,000 or 19,000 people. Of the Democrats who say that the condition of the nation's economy is good, it is 89%. Not so good is 62%, and poor is 10%. For the Republicans, 9% say it's good, 35% say it's not so good, and 88% say it's poor. So those, and I think that just reflects the whole idea of lining up by party, because it doesn't necessarily correlate with what the economy, is actually doing. And then, of course, if you look at it by region, then you get a lot of similarities by region also. So this is now, you just brought up the U.S. Senate, right? You got the U.S. House going on. And let's do the governors, how the governor's doing. The governors, so the governor from the state of Texas won, so did the lieutenant governor, so did the chief police officer. I thought that was very, very interesting. Louisiana is remained Democratic, and Mississippi remained Democratic. And if you look at what's going on there, you can ask this question from a Republican and Democratic point of view. What's the total number of revenue that these states send to Washington, D.C. based on taxes? Texas sends tons of money based on taxes. New England sends tons of money based on taxes. The other, the mid-states do not send tons of money. So-
Yeah, the answer to your question is Texas, California, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, and Florida subsidize the country.
Subsidize the country. And then we have the southern part where I'm from, that absolutely, in terms of taxes go into the country, right?
Mhm.
Or quote, the more conservative part, but on the other hand, Mississippi live off of the federal government.
Yeah.
Alabama lives off the federal government. Mississippi lives off the federal government. So my question is, as a registered Republican myself, I find it very, very interesting that those states that are called themselves Republican give very, very few to the actually, in terms of taxes to the running of the country, but also receive the most in
Right.
return. I think that's a big contradiction. And I think that part of the country, my part of the country, needs to get more innovative and and create more enterprises. I think that is quite
Look,
a
a point that I want to make here is, this is the first time that I see a lot of light blue in the map, which means that, the Republicans are coming up in those states that are traditionally very blue. I mean, look at Washington. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. I mean, that's there's a shift going on, right? And I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting. The shift seems to be all over the map, and this shift right here, this little red. Do you see this little red stripe there? That's never happened before. That's never happened before. So it's really interesting that I see the houses closest to the people, and then obviously, the Senate less so, and the governor less so, right? And the House, I mean, it's really interesting what's happening. And I agree with all of you that moderation is really what won in the election, in my opinion, and having a divided Congress is really what the people wanted.
I think you need to look also at population shifts in some of those light blue areas, because you do see a lot of retirees moving to those areas who tend to be more conservative in their vote anyway. And you certainly see that in Florida, where they don't have the kind of population that they used to. Number one, they're getting retirees from Midwestern states who are moving there, the sunbirds who are moving down there.
Yeah.
And they tend to be Republican, and they tend to be very, very moderately conservative Republicans.
Right.
Also get, of course, the Latino vote, also very conservative, leaning to the Republican Party for a lot of reasons, whether it's abortion, whether it's because they have enterprises of their own and Republican message appeals to them. But the population shift, I mean, in the case of Florida and DeSantis, that is very, very marked. DeSantis had that big win because of a change in population.
Yep. Well,
we call it New York South.
The other big issue which has not been raised is, and which was notably missing in the election, along with most of the big issues, was the environment.
right.
Florida is very vulnerable. If they get a lot of sea level rise, they actually lose their groundwater because it becomes contaminated. This is true in quite a lot of the country, but this could radically change the political thinking. Electorates generally, but not clearly this time, think that governments can be elected to fix everything, like that the government can somehow wave a wand and cure inflation, which has been building multiple causes and which is not entirely within the purview of any national government on earth. It takes a variety of things to drive it up and a variety of things to drive it down, notably the cost of energy. And until we get an accommodation between Russia and Ukraine, the cost of energy will continue to be very high and very global. I was interested when the Chinese locked down one area of the country, the price of oil fell. This shows how global we are. For all the ideas that we've moved away from globalization, if you touch one piece of the economy in Australia, it affects the economy in the US, etc. It is totally global, especially in energy, but also in all sorts of precious metals and the supply chain. We have inflation because of COVID, because of the interrupted supply chain, because of the high cost of energy occasioned first by mismanagement in Europe, then quickly followed by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. These things are not going to be fixed by any sovereign government with any single stroke of the pen. There's a lot of argument whether the central banks are pushing the cost of money up too high, but it's the only tool they have to calm overheated. We don't have another tool for calming overheated economies. Now, whether the Fed is overdoing it, I can't say. It certainly doesn't seem to be having a recessionary impact across the board. We still have very high employment, and you don't really have a recession and high employment. Those seem to be two things that don't go together traditionally anyway.
Yeah.
Let's take a state like Arizona. Okay. And I think Kelly is running. This is for the Senate in Arizona. I think at this point, I'm looking, he had 51.4% of the vote. And Masters has 46.9% of the vote. Let's move, as Linda said, to places where people are actually moving and see how the movement of the population is affecting that. You know, if you look at Phoenix, if you look at Tucson, and then if you look at the key things that are happening, then Kelly is leading and Masters is next at 46%. There, what's happening here is that I think there's almost a sameness of the political party. I would like to hear Llewellyn's comments on this. The question is, what's the differences? I had thought about some theoretical differences about what you're responsible for and et cetera. But I think at the end of the day, when the votes are done, there's a lot of yappity yap. And I think people are trying to get back to Washington, and there isn't much difference between the parties. Llewellyn, what do you think? I would like to ask you that.
Oh, I think at heart, there's a lot of difference. I think really there is a difference, and the conservative philosophy is different from the liberal philosophy. But in practice, most of the conservative ideas have not been practical, have not been brought into play, and liberals have not been able to go as far as they would like. The big point which Linda raised is, what are the conservatives going to do to entitlements? And if you want to undermine that conservative majority in Florida quickly, attack Social Security. These are sacred things in our setup, and however much Republicans would like to alter or reduce the amount of payments going out on Social Security, they would lose a lot of their steady, not so much their base, but their reliable voters. What the election has proved is the two bases were quite irrelevant. The crazy right base was quite irrelevant, and the far left woke base was quite irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's a middle vote for a middle course.
I think the other thing is that, you know, just looking at the terrible night that election deniers candidates had, people want a return to normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we would like to see a return to normal order in the Congress, which we have not had for years and years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
All the stopgap funding measures that we've had have really not let us move forward. And we lack the kind of Congress people who want to take on an issue with some kind of division thing and help the whole country, not just red and not just blue, but the whole country get through it.
Right.
And I think that is, you know, this is going to be maybe a hopefully a coming together of parties in some areas that we need both parties to start coming together on some issues so that we can confront the really big ones that are down the road, like
right.
what are we going to do about Taiwan if China attacks?
I
Well,
was
let me-
talking to a lobbyist friend of mine this morning, a man of sort of my age, and he said he thought that for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time since the Gingrich Revolution of '94,
Mhm.
you would have committees actually sit down and work on problems as they used to, because there isn't any grandstanding way around. The
Mhm.
grandstanding was not voted for in this election. And I think that a lot of the incoming members of Congress are going to think they came to Washington, that they had bought the government, that it was their property, will find very quickly the government is not so easily bought. And the imperatives of governing and the imperatives of the operation of a legislature are such that you can't steamroller it with your particular brand of whatever your philosophy is that was so effective in the campaign, doesn't wash on Capitol Hill. You
Doesn't-
can't get away with it. It doesn't work. In the end, you're going to have to work with people you might disagree with. And if you get lucky, you might actually have a drink with them and get something done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but let me just say something about my contribution, which I've seen in my lifetime.
Mhm.
When we say that the conservative would cut back on Social Security, the southern states live off of Social Security. Look, we don't have many great enterprises in the tradition of southern states. So we tried to go from a Dixiecrat to a Republican, but I just don't see how the Southern Republicans have accepted the part of Lincoln's diction that it should be a society based on enterprise, and we should have a lot of enterprises. In my region of the country, we've done 4 companies since 1860. We've done Coca-Cola, done in Atlanta. We've done if you look at the company in Federal Express, he just put it in Memphis. We have done Walmart, right? And and we've done Tabasco sauce, but look what happened in Texas. Look at all the companies that happened in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
We do not have that kind of activity. So you're telling me that the states that need the most are the most conservative? Well, it never made sense to me, being a Louisiana boy, because I know the importance of federal money going into the state of Louisiana, and I know that they don't return as much as the states
Right.
that does it. So I always said the Republicans are really Dixiecrats. haven't made that step from being Dixiecrats to Republicans, and the issues have passed. So I have to push back a little bit and say, is just because they're Republicans doesn't mean that they're going to cut back on things. I think they do it in different kind of ways. They say one thing and do another thing, and I think that.
So let me ask you all. This topic that I'm about to bring up became a topic first with Ross Perot run for president, and over time it became a topic that people talk about, which is our debt. Do you all worry that we're close to $30 trillion in debt and growing, and is that a problem? Anybody?
But let's take you through an economics class. What does a balanced budget mean to a country that prints money? I think that the fact that I have to have a budget balance in my family is very, very important. But philosophically and mathematically, I really don't know why. And everybody wants a balanced budget. We want to stand up like President Reagan did, and say, look, we now have a balanced budget. The question is, what does it mean? How does it make a difference in our lives when we say that we have a balanced budget? Just a theoretical question, because the country has been running on an unbalanced budget for a long time. And I'm just saying that I think we should have a budget balance, but the question is, what difference does it make? Does it make a difference in the price of the dollar as the dollar goes overseas? Does it make a difference in how the country support countries around the globe, because now, of course, not only do you just print money, it's all digital. So my question is, what does a balanced budget mean in the outcome? Does it mean that the interest rates are much better for business enterprises? Does it mean that I can put money in the bank now and go back to 10% interest rates as my parents did? I mean,
less dollars means less liquidity. Less liquidity means less resources. Less resources means
where it really matters
you can
is
print
that
money.
yes,
Yeah.
particularly in times of inflation, the cost to government of money gets very expensive and becomes a major budget item, which means there is less money for other things. But does it matter otherwise? Not in the short term. I think that it's misleading, Johnny, not that I would have the temerity normally to raise an issue with you, as you know, but saying that we print money is a little bit illusionary. What we do is we buy up debt through the Federal Reserve, which can be called printing money. It means that the government's balance sheet actually swells because it has assets that aren't particularly liquid. But it's a more complicated than making a comparison with your domestic budget, in that the government owns a lot of things. It has a lot. If it were a balance sheet and were to put assets on one side and liabilities on the other, the hard assets of the government would far outweigh the liabilities. But that's sort of silly too, to do that, because it's not very practical. I think so long as it's not too huge, so long as it does not begin to make a tremendous impact in the flexibility of the government finances, deficits don't matter. But ideally, if you had a balanced budget, there would be greater resources available for other things, including tax cuts, which have a direct impact on the business activity in a country and push it forward. You could get to an appalling situation, which is where the Brits are, where they have very few options, and they're borrowing more than they've ever borrowed in history, probably outside of wartime.
Yeah. Linda, you have an opinion?
Yeah, I think that, this very high debt load that we're carrying, of course, means that there's a lot less money to spend on government initiatives, a lot of initiatives that voters really do want. And then the other thing is that it's a national security issue. Because the higher the national debt becomes, the more the US is seen as a global credit risk. And that could impact the US's ability to borrow money in times of increased global pressure. And, we'll put risk on, for not being able to meet our obligations to our allies. So, I think.
So far, Linda, that has not happened, though. The dollar has remained everybody's favorite for investing, particularly for other governments for investing. And most of our debt is bought by foreign governments, not by individuals or banks.
It's true, but also what I've said is true. It can put us at risk as a credit risk.
Yeah.
Let me just say, let's just say I became president, and everybody's telling me, well, all of our dollars are now in China, right? And I said, okay, I don't really care about those dollars in China. We're gonna leave those dollars there, and we're gonna print money in America, print dollars in America, and we're gonna go buy back the dollars in China, just leave them there. What would that mean to the economy? What would it mean?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I would just say China can have all of the dollars. It won't impact on what we do. What we're going to do is we're going to print enough money, and we're not going to do inflation because China's out now. Okay. And what would that do? It's just very, very interesting. I had a student to ask me that one time and I didn't have an answer.
Well, I think it depends on when you say print money, we don't actually print money, we go and borrow money. And we buy up debt through the Federal Reserve. We buy up company debt through the Federal Reserve. qualitative easing is what it's called. But
Yes.
the fact is that we pay a price for an unbalanced budget, but it may be a price we can afford. Certainly, nobody has a scheme immediately to reduce the deficit. I remember when the deficit was going to be 200 billion, it was predicted by Jim Schlesinger. It went on page 1 of the Wall Street Journal and of the New York Times. And I remember it particularly because he made the prediction at a conference I was running. Now we're in the trillions, and it hasn't really made much difference. Whether there'll be a day of reasoning, I don't know. What I do think is we're going to pay a huge price for climate change. People are not going to stay in the West if there is no water, if they have to pay a huge amount for water, if a lot of farms in the West fail, if we have to start relying on truck farming from Canada grown in greenhouses, that kind of thing. If we see people leaving Florida because of water contamination or flooding, we could see huge population movements that would profoundly affect the economy of the country and profoundly affect the politics. And there is no quick political fix. There's no funny red hat you can get with a slogan on it that will solve the problem.
Well, I think one thing that we also saw during the run-up to the elections was the talk about tax cuts and making some of the Trump tax cuts permanent. And I think that in times of high deficit, if you're worried about the deficit, I think that's not going to happen.
I think so. It's very interesting. See, all of these things are very, very interesting. And the fact that we've gone up trillions and trillions and the country is still here is just interesting to me. I think it becomes an issue, and I think we love the issue. I mean, I would love to have a balanced budget, but then it's a theoretical question would say, okay, we got all these $1 trillion in debt and the country's still moving. Why is that? So that's why I was asking.
So let's talk about inflation real quick. So it didn't seem like inflation had an impact on the election as most people thought it would. Why not?
Maybe because people realized that neither party had an answer to inflation, that there is no magic wand that can be waved.
But inflation, Freeman has always said that, and I agree with him, the inflation is created by government by printing paper.
Well, that's what he said. It's created by other things. It's created by shortages. Shortages pushing up costs. We have shortages in the supply chain. We have a shortage of energy. We have a shortage of labor. We have shortages, and shortages push up costs.
Right.
No matter what Freeman said in the Chicago school.
Okay. You should write a book about that.
It's been written. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, clearly, Johnny, Andres, you should keep writing books and stop reading them. That is the equivalent of an unbalanced budget, and it seems to work very well for you.
Yeah, no, all I'm saying is, how come some of these things are not creating the outcomes that most people think,
No, but this is a very interesting time. This was supposed to be the seminal election that was going to save or doom democracy. None of that is true. Mm-hmm. It is actually an election that has rather affirmed democracy, mm-hmm. rather than catapulted it into the wasteland of nothing. Democracy seems to me in America today to be more vital and alive than it was yesterday. And that's very good news. And I think people should feel good about that common sense has prevailed, and that underlying it is a recognition that governments cannot do magic.
Right.
I think you're right. There's a difference between, capitalism can exist without democracy. It'll be hard for democracy to exist without capitalism. So I think on the one hand, you've got the voting to make sure that our kind of protection go on. On the other hand, we have the market economies with people making billions of dollars, and they say, well, why should I have to pay taxes on the billions of dollars, because the billions of dollars are for innovation. We'll take care of the employees. So I think that's a contradiction we've always lived with. So if
Well,
all of
we have lived with a contradiction, and it's a very reasonable contradiction
Yeah.
to live with. We have never totally decided how much capitalism is good for us or how much government intervention. We can all say we don't need the nanny state, but many of the things we cherish, including Social Security, and in my case, Medicare, and probably in yours, Johnny.
in my case, I just got it yesterday.
Products of the nanny state, you might say, but we like them when we get them. The fact that we live by and large in well-regulated communities with fire service and with ambulance service and all of these things, this is a function of the good things that government, local and federal, provide for us, which we need. And conservatives traditionally have resisted them all the way, which is why Winston Churchill, generally thought of as a great conservative, because he became leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party, said that Social Security was typed across his forehead. He loved Social Security, and he said that back at the time of the general strike or somewhere like that in Britain. Certainly when the Labour government came in and Churchill was in opposition, he opposed a lot of things, but the basic idea of a welfare state was accepted. And we live in basically a welfare state, whether we accept it or not. And I think all we have to do is perfect it. And you, Johnny, today have done an extraordinary and beautiful and eloquent job of explaining how those retrograde southern states depend on welfare and are welfare states, depending on the largesse of people like ourselves in the hardworking New England.
What I think is this. I think that the pension system has to be reinvented. I think that
I agree, absolutely.
401k, it is not a serving plan. And I think as a veteran, all veterans should be taken care of. And I think we're too rich not to take care of the elderly. But what's happened now without the pension system, I think that going in the future, if you don't have a pension system like they had years ago, you work for General Motors, you got the pension until you died. You work for, well, my wife has a pension system, but at the University of Texas, they just give me all of mine. When I retire, I can go spend it in Las Vegas if I want to, because it's in a 401k. But I think the revitalization politically, we have to somehow get back to the two-way relationship between where you work and the workers themselves and the company contributing to taking care of their own. So therefore, if I work for Lexus for 40 years and they just give me a 401k and I make them billions of dollars, I just think that I should have a pension from them and not a 401k.
Well, but this is a very uneven benefit. It does not, for example, favor those in the gig economy. It wouldn't favor me. I've been self-employed for 50 years. It wouldn't work. I ran a conference once on whether it would work to privatize Social Security. It was a very interesting conference, and we had Pete Peterson, and we had the editor of The Economist, and all sorts of big name people. And it was originally a democratic idea, which was adopted by some conservatives and became a conservative idea, and finally abandoned by everyone because you couldn't guarantee the stock market and it was too difficult to have people. However, I would say for the old-fashioned pension schemes, one of the good things about it was it put huge amounts of capital into the market. Why I was interested in privatizing Social Security was to put a lot of capital into the market, which would mean a flood of new companies and innovation.
True, but you also, states have also got to look at the growing unfunded pension liabilities. And that is a problem. You have states where you don't have new workers who are replenishing.
That's a population pyramid issue, right?
That's right, so. It is. And it's another one of those things that is going to need the vision thing. And when candidates talk about reforming state pensions, it's, oh my word, that's another third rail besides Social Security.
Yeah, take a look at this as we need to wrap up here, but job creation comparison of all these presidents, months in office.
Yes, and of course you have to look at what was going on in the world. Look at technology. Look, most of that was done by Silicon Valley. Okay, with all of the great stuff they did in Boston, right, in Texas, where most of the job creation was done. I mean, Texas created 7 times the amount of jobs than anybody in the country. So you got to look at this by aggregate. You look at it now by aggregate, and then look at it by the total. I agree. That's good. Yeah. And what it's saying is, it looks like to me, point, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see Bush 43 with the war there.
Yeah.
And you see Reagan with borrowing. He borrowed to get a lot of that job growth.
Yeah.
Right.
And Clinton was lucky with the bubble.
Piggybacking on the Reagan years.
Yeah, piggybacking on it and then expanding it with the tech growth buoyed by the internet, by finally the realization of the internet.
Well,
Internet, Silicon Valley kicking in, Apple coming in.
Everybody. He was so lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is still with public confidence, but I'd like to go back to the matter of deficits and government activity. Somehow we run up huge deficits during wartime. Governments borrow extravagantly, print money massively, and somehow we come out of wars after that and have periods of prosperity. This doesn't quite add up, does it, Johnny? You're the mathematician, the statistician, the man of business, my leader in all thought matters.
Well, I don't know. I think what happens is you have to standardize everything, and I think this is what's really, really true. I think as I said earlier, when taxes go up, businesses are hurt because it's harder for them to get loans. It's harder for them to create jobs. But on the other hand, if you have a lot of money in the bank in CDs, then your interest rates go up. So maybe CDs will go up from 0 now to 4%. Just think if it went to 10%, why would you put your money in the stock market anymore? So I think that the debt clock and what's happening is that if you can get rid of the debt, right? And if you look at the debt, get rid of the debt itself, then nobody will have any debt, and then there will be no borrowing, right? It's like, there'll be no more borrowing. But the big thing for America has always been, how do you grow the enterprises with this least taxes as possible? And the obverse of that.
And again, this is just a public debt clock.
Right.
There is also a private debt clock, which is, you've heard the notion that, if you borrow money, you don't pay taxes when you put that money to work. And the private debt clock is gigantic. It's larger than that. Nobody talks about it.
I thought that was a Kansas basketball score running like that, but I guess it's not. That's a U.S. national debt. Okay.
But here's the data point that is really interesting. Final thoughts as we're moving out. When Obama ran for president, the national debt was $18 trillion. And he got hammered after he added like $5 trillion or $6 trillion on top of that. We're now at 31 trillion, and there is no end in sight. Nobody talks about it anymore. We'll be at 50 trillion in 10 years.
Yeah, that's a national security problem.
And that's my question for everyday American in voting. What does it mean? It might mean security, but what does it really mean from a mathematical point of view when businesses are going, people have jobs, and there's no war? But when there's a war, it really goes up.
I used to know a lawyer in Washington who said, bring on inflation. It's how the government services its debt.
Yeah. All right, guys, final thoughts. Johnny?
Well, I think it's an interesting program. I think we're seeing how the American people are voting their hearts, but they're not necessarily voting their pocketbook as usual. I see a sameness across the American people. But the most important thing is that we're voting. Most important thing is we don't have any issues about stealing votes and et cetera. It's one of the few countries in America where power moves very, very good, and we want to keep that. So it's always good to see an election and people just said, okay, we won and we lost. We need to get back to that.
Llewellyn?
I endorse that. I mean, unusual as it is for me to be wholeheartedly in agreement with Dr. John Sibley Butler. Nonetheless, he's quite absolutely right. And it's been a good day for America. We've had an election, the people have spoken, the extremists have been substantially quieted, and the sense that we can get on with our lives and our business and tackling the challenges of the future, I think is back. I think there is something restorative in this vote, and I didn't expect it, and I'm glad of it.
Excellent, excellent. Linda?
I agree with Llewellyn. I didn't expect it, but I think we had the moderate middle, a return to that moderate middle. Really is where America is at. Thoughtful people, concerned about the future, looking to leadership, to help them into the next stage in this country. And I was very refreshed to see that that's basically the way the elections turned out.
Divided government rules.
Johnny, are you taking requests?
Sir?
Are you taking requests?
If I could play it.
What would you like? What would you like, Llewellyn?
Play it.
Well, I think also for Veterans Day, we should thank Johnny for his service.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try to take one that you like. How's this one?
There you go.
Give us your tired and weak, and we will make them strong. Bring us your foreign songs, and we will sing along. Leave us your broken dreams. We give them time to mend. There's still a lot of love living in the promised land. Living in the promised land. Our voting is made of steel. The dream for everyone to see how freedom feels. There is a winding road across the sinking sand, and room for everyone living in the promised land. And they came from miles around, different isles with a sad tale. Nowhere to run, and nowhere to go, and nowhere to fall. So give us your tired and weak, and we will make them strong. Bring us your foreign songs, and we will sing along. Bring us your broken dreams. We'll give them time to mend. There's still a lot of room living in America land.
Bravo, Johnny. That's why we love you, Johnny. We really do.
That was your request. I read your mind.